Saran Kavim. I hope all are well. It is extremely windy here, but with the wind, we're all safe and we're sound, and with prayers for our friends and relatives and all those in the LA area with what they are dealing with, for those throughout the Middle East with all they're dealing with Israel, for all they're dealing with. There's just so much in our world. This week's Parsha is Parshat VaYechi, and I've entitled this Retrospective, Mixed Blessings and Managing Reality. So after so many chapters and generations of conflicts and acrimonious interactions, we come to a somewhat comforting end, or at least a pause, with Yaakov knowing he is about to die and making his son Yoseph promise to have him buried with his family, not in Mitzrayim. At this point, he blesses his sons, and in the case of Yoseph, his grandsons, and expresses both a sense of reality and hopes for the future. As we consider two sets of these blessings, I would ask that what we may consider to be errors in the human realm are often God's hands in our lives, as we have observed throughout Sefer Bereshit during this particular year of discussions. First, let us examine the blessings for Menashe and Ephraim, the sons of Yoseph. We read about this in Parak 48, Mem Chet. We read, at some point, Ephraim tells Yoseph, your father is ailing. VaYomer leYoseph hinei avicha choleh. Yoseph then takes his two sons, Menashe and Ephraim. Ephraim then tells Jacob, your son, Yoseph, has come to you. Hinei bincha Yoseph ba'alecha. Vayitchazek Yisrael vayeshev al hamita. Now remember, Yaakov, Yisrael, is dying. He is at the end of his life. But he summons his strength and he sits up in bed. And again, he's called Yisrael, the indication of strength and of struggling, both at the same time. Now notice who is orchestrating all of this. Ephraim, the younger son, just as Yaakov, the younger son, had arranged what he arranged, just as Yitzchak, the younger son. Okay. Rashi suggests that once again, trying to justify the favored position of an offspring, that Ephraim studied regularly with Yaakov and thus had the most constant and consistent interaction with him, therefore being the obvious one to be the facilitator of what is to come. Yaakov now says to Yoseph, VaYomer Yaakov. Now again, we just read Yisrael, Yitchazek v'yashav. It was Yisrael that was strong and set up, but now we've gone back to Yaakov. Now it says to Yoseph, El Shaddai nir'eh Elai. God has appeared to me as El Shaddai and has blessed me, Vayivarech oti. He then said, I will make you fruitful and numerous. And we hear this again, we've heard this earlier. I will make you a community of peoples, and I will give this land to your descendants, and it will be their permanent inheritance. L'zarecha acharecha achuzat olam. This will be your inheritance forever. Now, your two sons, says Yaakov, Yisrael, to Yoseph, who were born in Egypt before I came to you, will be considered as mine. Lihem, Ephraim, Menashe. Ephraim, again, indicated before Menashe. They will be to me like my own sons, Reuven and Shimon, Yehiyuli, mentioning his first two sons. They will be considered mine, Lihem, says Rashi. In other words, they are to be counted with my other sons, given a share in the land of Israel, each receiving an appropriate portion. Now, Yoseph is second to the king of Mitzrayim. He has this position, and therefore does not get a share in the land of his brothers when they come to Goshen. But his sons will each get a share of land, and thus the status of Bnei Yaakov is bestowed upon the sons, Menashe and Ephraim, as Yorshim, along with his own sons. While this double Yerusha could be to acknowledge Yoseph in what he has done, it cannot be attributed to him specifically, as he has this political position. Immediately after this, we see some confusion on Yaakov's part regarding who Menashe and Ephraim are when they are brought to him. We see in verse 10, V'nei Yisrael kibdu mizoken. We saw this with Yitzchak. And the eyes of Yisrael, using the name of largesse, not Yaakov, had become dimmed because of his old age. Below yuchal lirot, he was not able to see. Vayigash otam elav, and they were brought to him, Menashe and Ephraim, and vayishak lahem, vayichadek lahem, and Yaakov kissed them and embraces them. Then we go back, Yisrael. Now, no name is indicated in the previous verse, by the way. It's just assumed. But here we see Yisrael. Again, that's strength. This at the end of his life, this back and forth between being Yaakov and being Yisrael. Yisrael then says to Yoseph, Ro'eh panecha lo pilati. I never dared to even pray that I would see your face. And now, not only have I seen your face, gam et zarecha, I also now know your children. In other words, the word lo pilalti. Now pei lamed lamed is a very interesting shoresh, and we've discussed this before. Lehit palel, to pray. Asher, that we have sinned before you by judging. The same shoresh. Pei lamed lamed has a sense of being held accountable, or in somehow reacting in an accountable way to what is going on. So the verb connotes the use of pei lamed lamed, which might not be the most obvious choice of the verb to be using here, is the idea of I never imagined, I never thought, and then here I am. So once again, we have a word with so many possible meanings. Could there be a notion of prayer here? It's possible. Or faith-filled uncertainty. So again, we have these words that the range of meanings are so wide and nuanced. There's a continuum of the meanings. The meaning over here is definitely connected to the meaning over there. How do we reconcile them? At this point, Yoseph withdraws them from between his father's knees. Yoseph bows on the ground with his face toward the ground. So after Yisrael had kissed them, after Yaakov had kissed them, Yoseph withdraws in order to place each in the proper position. Menashe where he belongs as the eldest, and Ephraim in the youngest. What did Yoseph know? What fear did he have? What unresolved concerns? Remember, he, as the youngest child, until Binyamin is born, was tossed away, was completely severed from the family dynamic. This family has this generational problem with identifying the oldest, and the oldest not getting his rightful inheritance as a Bachor. So he takes them and he places them, Ephraim with his right hand to stand at Yisrael's left, and Menashe, and Yisrael is used here, not Yaakov. This is verse 13. And Menashe with his left hand to stand at Israel's right, because he's the firstborn, and brings them close to him. So what Yoseph intended was that the firstborn be placed on the right for the blessing of the firstborn. Remember Yaakov and Esav and the blessings that they each got from Yitzchak. And then Yaakov gets Esav's blessing, Esav gets Yaakov's blessing, supposedly. But again, it's God's hand in ensuring that what is supposed to happen happens. So this pattern is repeated, and Yaakov himself is repeating and expanding upon Yitzchak in terms of intentionality, and yet blessing Ephraim, the favored one, who for him, like Esav and Yitzchak, had spent the most time with Yaakov. He blesses Yoseph and says, "May God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Yitzchak walked, Elokim asher hitalchu avotai lefanav Abraham v'Yitzchak Elokim haroeh oti v'odi ad hayom hazeh." God has been my shepherd, has been my leader, has been my guide from my earliest days until now, and has always sent an angel. This is Yaakov speaking, remember the dream? Has always sent an angel, and we know this text, Hamalach hagoel oti mikol ra yavarech et hanarim vayikra behem shemi b'shem avatai Abraham v'Yitzchak vayigu larov b'kerev haaretz. This is the blessing we give children, that we repeat before going to bed, that this is this blessing that we are always in the hands of God. God is always with us. God is always guiding us. So here Yaakov owns the blessing he is giving, adding his place in God's plan to that of his father and grandfather. Remember, we have said along the way that each person who gets the Yerusha, who gets the inheritance, has to add his own piece to the puzzle. And this is what Yaakov is doing here, it appears. We see at this time that the confusion of the understanding of who gets what blessing is a human problem. But in the end, the correct blessing will go to the appropriate child. And that's where God comes in. Yoseph sees, however, because he doesn't understand all this, that his father had placed his right hand on Ephraim's head, and he was displeased, so he lifts his father's hand in order to move it from Ephraim's to Menashe's head. Yoseph then says to his father, "This isn't right. You need to give the firstborn blessing to the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." Vayima'an aviv. His father hesitates. Yaakov, with his dimmed eyes, with not being able to see all of that, hesitates for a moment. And notice his reaction, which is very different than Yitzchak. Yitzchak kind of buys the joke, if you will. The skin is the skin of Esau, the voice is the voice of Yaakov. But here, notice what happens. His father, Vayima'en, he hesitates, saying, "I know, my son, I know. Yadati b'ni, yadati. Gam hu yiyeh la'am, v'gam hu yigdal." He will also be a great nation. He will also rise. However, achiv hakatan yigdal mimenu. His younger brother will surpass him. And again, this too is part of this repeated pattern that we have seen already, and we know almost seems part of the Yerusha. His younger brother will surpass him. Ulam achiv hakatan yigdal mimenu, Rashi says. We know that Yoshua, is destined to be born from him. And it's Yoshua who will apportion the land of Canaan and teach Israel the Torah. And his descendants will fill all the nations. The entire world will be filled with this widespread fame and renown. And again, this will come from Ephraim. He blesses them and he says, "With your names will the Israelites invoke God's blessings on their sons, saying to them, Yisimcha Elohim ke Ephraim u'Menashe." And again, this is part of the prayer that we say for our children before Shabbat, before Yom Kippur. And notice who gets top billing, Ephraim. I think there's a really important lesson here, and it's something that I deal with a lot in my work with parents and rabbis and people in the community through my work with Eshel, with the LGBT folks in the Orthodox world. I deal with it in other areas around women's rights and women's role in the synagogue, in the public domain, all of that. There's the halacha. There are the rules. The rules were the firstborn was the firstborn. But here we see generation after generation after generation, for whatever reasons, that younger child is the one that gets the primary position. How do we account for that? Maybe we don't. But maybe God has God's reasons. And maybe when we confront these issues, which seem so insurmountable and often are amplified by the cultural and political climate in which we live, we have to ask ourselves again, Aviva Zornberg's lesson always, what is behind and underneath the words? What is intended? Is it meant that that will always be the way? Is it irrefutable? Or are there circumstances in which we make pivots and we change and we modify for very legitimate reasons? Every time we say, Yesimcha Elohim Kefraim U'Menashe, we are reminded that, yes, the firstborn is the firstborn, but the firstborn is not always the one that gets the primary position. That's very interesting. Bachor, firstborn with a chet, and Bachor, the firstborn, the chaf, it's the same sound. The word is a little bit different, but even the proximity of those words are very interesting. The chosen, the first, right? So Ephraim is mentioned in the blessing before Menashe. Once again, firstborn status is not the primary consideration. This will be repeated again within these blessings at the end of Yaakov's life. One must wonder what insight he now has that he has learned and how he might, as a human being, have made other decisions along the way. However, when considering this, remember God's plan is present and at work at every turn. So every misstep, every problem, one of the things that we teach is when something doesn't go right or we make a mistake or we take a detour, whatever, we ask ourselves, what have we learned from this? What was the reason that this experience was one that we were supposed to go through? Maybe that's part of what's at work here. Maybe there's a much larger lesson here, namely that yes, people come into being with certain ingrained privileges and a foot up, so to speak, or yad elyon, an upper hand, as we say. Yaakov grabs onto Esau's heel. But as we go through life, we make our own way and leave legacies that may defy our inherited place in the destined orders planned. This is important to keep in mind when we talk about Yaakov grabbing the heel, Yisrael grappling with, wrestling with, contending with, trying to figure out one's relationship with God. This is important to keep in mind when considering the other blessings bestowed in this parsha. For example, let's look at those marked for Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and afterwards Yehuda. Reuven, you are my firstborn, my strength, the very seed of my virility. You should have been foremost in rank and power. Yater sha'at, foremost, meaning you were supposed to be greater than your brothers. You were supposed to receive the priesthood. You were supposed to have more strength. However, you have shown yourself to be as fluid as water. Therefore, you will not be foremost amongst your brothers. Why? Because you mounted your father's bed. And of course, this is in reference to what Reuven did. You have profaned the name of God, and you have acted in a way that's just not acceptable. Therefore, you are quick to anger. You're quick to display your emotions like water that runs hastily through its course. Therefore, you will not receive all these privileges, which were yours. You profaned, az chilalta. You profaned the name of God when you ascended my bed. So, Reuven, who's the firstborn, we learn ahead of time, unlike after the game, which was in the previous chapters, that he will not have that foremost and that uppermost position because of his actions. In other words, you might be firstborn. You may come into this world with certain privileges and certain steps up, but don't assume that they're going to get you through. You have to continually work to earn them and to maintain them. Next, we go to Shimon and Levi. Shimon v'Levi, achim kolei chamas mechartehem. They, wherever they went, used weapons of violence. And Rashi explains they were of one mind in the plot against Shechem and against Yoseph. In the episode about Yoseph, it says, they said to each other, so let's just go and kill him. Who were they? If you say that it refers to Reuven or Yehuda, they did not agree to have him killed. If you say that it refers to the sons of the bondwomen, their hatred of him was not so great, because it says about Yosef, he acted like a young boy, v'hunar et b'nei Bilhah et b'nei Zilpah. He had a good relationship with them. Yisachar and Zebulun would not have spoken up in the presence of their older brothers. Therefore, al kirchacha Shimon v'Levi. This has to be Shimon and Levi, who are the troublemakers. Do they catch that Reuven is not deserving, and do they try to exert their power? I mean, if you look at this, it talks about, it references, it refers to, it hints at very human realities, which we all confront. And we see that within this discussion, we have mixed blessings and managing reality. Yes, the children are blessed, but in reality, in terms of the way they act, what blessings do they come in with, and what blessings do they earn, and what blessings do they ultimately get? Then Yaakov says, let my soul not enter, in other words, let my name not be mentioned, in reference to their conspiracy. Let my honor have no part in that conspiracy. Why? Ki bapam hargu ish ubertanam ikro short. They killed all of, this reference is Shechem's man, and they wanted to maim Yosef like a work bull. So Yaakov, Yisrael, is reflecting a great deal of pain here. So as much as his vision has waned, as much as he may be infirmed in his older years, his mind is sharp, if you will, in terms of understanding the blessings or the legacies or the statements that he gives to these children. It's no longer the aspirational blessing that one might have, but it's the realistic statement of what they have become. Let my name not be with them. It goes on. Korach, son of Yitzchar, son of Kahat, son of Levi. So this goes on for generations, this problem with managing one's reality and maintaining one's humility. And then Yaakov says, Ra'avur apam, cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, it is fury, it is harsh. I will separate them. I will separate them from the tribes of Yaakov and scatter them amongst Yisrael. Now remember, Levi does not get an apportionment of land, whereas Ephraim and Manasseh do in the merit of their father, who has just been referred to as the workhorse. Now we go to Yehuda. Yehuda. Ata yaducha achecha, yadcha ba'araf ayvecha yishtachavu lecha b'nei avicha. Your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be holding on to the neck of fleeing enemies, and the descendants of your father's sons will bow down to the kings who will come from you. Yehuda ata yaducha achicha. Rashi says, your brothers will praise you because Yaakov has rebuked the first three sons with harsh words. You are the first one that gets a blessing that actually sounds like a blessing. So one of the things that Rashi says is that Yehuda began backing away because Yehuda was not perfect. Remember that little incident with Tamar? So at this point, Rashi says, "V'kara Yaakov b'divrei Hatzui Yehuda lo ata kamota," and this is based on the Bereshit Rabbah. Yehuda, you messed up, but you're not like them. You're not fighting with vicious means. You're not disrespecting your father. You're not acting in a way that's so heinous, which is kind of interesting because we could have all kinds of discussions about what Yehuda did to Tamar, and it clearly is not right, and it's not saying that it's great, but there's almost degrees of wrongdoing here, some being worse than others, and we all understand this in our world today, for sure. So here we have a most interesting accounting of past deeds, inherited legacies, and future occurrences that will continue to serve as testimony to the various individuals and their nature, acknowledging their reality. There are those who suggest that these words do not sound like blessings at all, but rather ominous warnings. So let's try this. Let's think of our own lives and those of the ones we love. Look at where we are today and where we were a number of decades ago. If we would meet our younger selves, would we think of ourselves and others in the same way? Or has experience and various occurrences changed our perspectives and our perceptions? To what degree do these words, which reflect the past and imagine the future, show where the individuals receiving these blessings stand in the trajectory of history? Any one of us who remember the very beginning of our children, when we're parents and our child comes into the world and you see this beautiful baby and you have all these hopes and you have all these aspirations, and then the child grows up and you go through all these challenges, and then does the child turn out exactly like you had hoped, that your blessings had anticipated, or different? And can we see them still as a blessing, though perhaps in a different way? When we use this line of consideration, we understand that blessings, whenever they are given, go beyond an individual or a specific time. Rather, they are reflective of the many elements that make up our reality, and they encapsulate different actions and characteristics of a person. They are a group of snapshots, if you will, over time. In this way, we look at the composite and we express both the highest hopes and the understanding of how reality will introduce mitigating circumstances, understanding that we will pivot. The child we come to love and come to know as an adult may be the same, or more likely will be quite different than the child we imagined when they were born. This will yield the most useful, if not the most glorious, of blessings. Here is a most important consideration of what it means to bless our children. When we are blessing our sons in the names of Ephraim and Manasseh, we are reminded of the juxtaposition of our expectations, our hopes in a given moment, and our acknowledgement of the reality of time and its expansive opportunity for individuals to grow, to change, to develop, to become their own persons, hopefully taking our teachings, but reframing them in a way that makes them them. Similarly, it is so when we bless our daughters in the name of Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Here is God's perspective, looking back as well as forward, and considering that any given moment is part of that longer and greater and wider trajectory. Blessings are blessings in the best sense of the word when they acknowledge the reality of the person more than our expectations or our aspirations for them. If we can look at ourselves, at our children, if we ourselves can think about our own dreams and have us now speak to that younger child, what are the blessings that we have? Some will for sure be different. Some may have been lost, but others will certainly have been gained. That is how we work with juxtaposing the blessings we hold and the reality we confront. Shabbat Shalom to all. Lihitraat. And, of course, at the end of Bereshit, we say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek. Lihitrot.